The bull was found standing in the pouring rain, guarding a poor child's shoes. What happens next will leave you speechless. The rain hammered down on Harrowfen's narrow streets, washing dust and soot into the drains, when Calder Dren stopped dead in his tracks. In the mouth of a dim alley, a massive black bull stood unmoving, its body tense, its eyes burning with a strange alertness. Water rolled off its hide, catching the faint glow of a distant street lamp, and beneath the shadow of its heavy frame lay something that made Calder's stomach twist. A pair of children's shoes, small, worn, patched at the toes, with their fraying laces tied neatly together. They were not tossed aside or forgotten. They were placed with care, untouched by the flowing rainwater that streaked down the cracked brick wall. And the bull was guarding them. Calder's chest tightened. He had grown up around farms before his family moved into the city for work, and he had seen bulls before. He knew their power, their sudden fury, the danger in being too close. But this was no pasture animal grazing behind fences. This was a beast loose in the heart of Harrowfen, and instead of charging, it stood sentinel. Its sides heaved with slow breaths, and scratches marred its flanks, as if it had fought off something recently. The sight unsettled Calder more than if it had bellowed and rushed him. A bull that fought yet chose to stand guard meant a story he did not yet understand. "Easy there," Calder murmured, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound calm. His boots sank slightly in the rain-soaked ground as he inched closer, eyes darting between the bull's lowered horns and the shoes beneath its shadow. His own reflection flickered in the rainwater pooling on the ground, distorted, fragile, like his thoughts at that moment. He extended a hand toward the shoes, not touching, just testing the space. The bull's hoof struck the ground with a deep, warning thud. Its chest rumbled with a growl-like sound, a vibration that Calder felt in his bones more than he heard. He froze, hand suspended in the air, every instinct screaming at him to step back. His breath fogged in the cool night as he slowly lowered his arm. The beast had not attacked, but its message was clear. These shoes were not for him. Calder swallowed hard, forcing himself to think. He looked again at the shoes, patched leather, the sort worn by poor children in the factory districts. He scanned the alley, hoping to catch sight of a small figure, but the only things staring back at him were rain-dark bricks and a rusted drainpipe leaking steady streams of water. No child waited in the shadows, just the shoes and the bull. Unease crawled beneath Calder's skin. His life, up until that moment, had been measured in shifts at Helric Forge, in the coins he struggled to stretch for bread, and in his duty to care for his younger brother Bryn. He had little room for mysteries or omens. Yet the longer he stood in that alley, the harder it became to walk away. Something about the sight felt wrong, too deliberate, too guarded. He forced himself to step back onto the street, the bull's eyes following him as though weighing his soul, and then hurried home through the rain. But sleep did not come that night. He lay awake in the cramped loft above the forge quarters, Bryn breathing softly on the cot beside him. Calder's thoughts circled endlessly. Who would leave a child's shoes there? Why would a bull guard them? And who had carved those scratches into the beast's flesh? He turned onto his side, staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling an invisible thread pulling him back to that alley. The following morning, Calder gave in. He rose earlier than usual, leaving Bryn with a promise of bread by evening, and returned to the alley. Rain still fell, though softer now, and there it was, the bull, still standing, still unyielding, its massive body seeming heavier than before. The shoes had not moved. Exhaustion showed in the beast's eyes, yet it remained. Calder felt a strange respect take root in him. Whatever this animal was, it had chosen its ground and would not abandon it. By midday, word had spread through Harrowfen. Whispers followed Calder as he passed men hunched outside taverns or waiting for their shifts. Some called it a spirit guardian. Others muttered about a curse. A group of older mill workers spoke more clearly. They said the bull might be Brutus, a creature bred for the illegal fighting pits in Ashmere, a town not far from Harrowfen. They told stories of a beast forced to fight until it broke free, vanishing into the night years ago. Calder listened with half an ear, skeptical. Pit animals were killers, bred and bloodied for men's amusement. Yet the bull he had seen had not killed him, had not chased him. It had guarded shoes. That evening, Calder returned again, compelled as though drawn by some chain. The bull remained, rain streaming off its back, and Calder's boots splashed quietly as he stepped closer. This time, something new caught his eye. Beneath the shoes, nearly hidden against the wall, was a scrap of fabric. Calder crouched, heart thudding, and pulled it free. The cloth was torn, stiff with damp, but stitched into its corner was a name, Darren Vey. Calder's breath caught. He recognized the name faintly. Darren was a boy often seen at the steelworkers' gates, begging for coins or scraps of bread. Recently, Calder had seen notices tacked to the board. Darren missing, last seen near the forges. Calder's hand tightened around the cloth. The shoes were not simply abandoned, they belonged to a child who had vanished. And the bull, scarred and silent, was the last barrier between that truth and whoever had tried to erase it. A chill coursed through Calder as he tucked the fabric into his pocket. He glanced at the bull again. Its head dipped slightly, as though acknowledging his discovery. Or perhaps it was simply tired. Still, Calder could not shake the thought that the animal knew more than it could show. He stood there in the rain, water soaking through his coat, realizing that his quiet life had just been pierced by something larger, something dangerous. When he finally turned to leave, the bull did not follow. It stood exactly where it had before, watching the shoes as if the child who owned them might return at any moment. Calder walked away with his heart heavy, the name Darren Vey echoing in his mind, and the uneasy knowledge that he had stumbled into a secret that would not let him go. Foreshadowing stirred as Calder pocketed the fabric. He did not know then that Darren's disappearance tied into something darker, something not just about a missing boy, but about Harrowfen's hidden dealings. The bull was not only a symbol of protection, but a witness, and perhaps a survivor of what had taken place in the shadows of the town. Calder's quiet life of wages and brotherly duty was about to fracture, pulled into a conflict where men and beasts carried secrets equally heavy, and where finding Darren could cost more than Calder imagined. By the third night, Calder Dren stood once more at the mouth of the alley, the rain dripping steadily from the eaves above, the air heavy with damp and rust. He carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth, scraps of bread and a piece of smoked meat, what little he could spare from his own and Bryn's meal. The bull was there, just as before, massive and still, its eyes glinting like dark embers in the half-light. Calder knelt slowly, his boots squelching in the wet earth, and placed the food near the wall. The bull's nostrils flared, steam curling in the night air. For a long moment it did not move, as though weighing Calder's intent. Then, with deliberate care, it stepped forward, lowered its head, and nudged the bundle open. The sound of teeth tearing into bread echoed strangely in the narrow space. Calder exhaled slowly, almost a sigh of relief. "Not much," Calder whispered, his voice low and steady, as though speaking to another man rather than an animal. "But it's something. Better than the hunger you've been carrying." The bull lifted its head, crumbs clinging to its muzzle, and stared at him. Calder felt a shiver run along his arms. There was something in those eyes, an intelligence, sharp and present. He did not fool himself into thinking the animal understood his words, but perhaps it understood his intent, his promise of respect. And so, a fragile trust began to form, unspoken, but real. Yet even as this bond grew, Calder's mind was restless. The scratches carved into Brutus's hide were not made by claws or fences. They were marks of men. Someone had tried to drive the beast off, or worse, and failed. That fact haunted Calder as much as the shoes once had. And now another image returned to him, the chalk symbols he had seen faintly on the alley wall during his last visit. That afternoon he had looked again, brushing away the rainwash to reveal faint shapes, jagged marks that he recognized from whispered warnings. They were tied to the underground trade, the one led by Garin Holt, a name spoken with unease throughout Harrowfen. Holt's business was shadow, smuggling, stolen goods, and whispered rumors of worse things, things involving the poor, the desperate, the forgotten. Calder's throat tightened as the pieces slid together. What if children were part of that trade? What if Darren Vey had not wandered but been taken? And what if the bull, wounded and unyielding, had fought those men in the very act? The thought turned Calder's curiosity into something sharper, heavier. Responsibility pressed on him like the weight of the forge hammer. Brutus had chosen to stand guard over shoes. Calder felt he must choose as well. But Harrowfen was not forgiving. To dig into Holt's affairs was to place one's life on the line. The first obstacle struck sooner than expected. At Helrick Forge the next day, Calder worked the hammers with sweat streaming down his back, the roar of the furnaces filling his ears, when Silas Roke appeared. Silas was a foreman, thick-necked and broad-shouldered, his arms bearing the scars of both labor and fights fought outside the yard. He leaned on Calder's anvil, a casual smile stretched across his face, though his eyes were cold. "Heard you've been spending your evenings in alleys," Silas said, his voice pitched low but carrying easily over the clang of metal. "That's no place for a young man with debts to pay and a brother to feed." Calder kept his hammer steady, striking the metal in rhythm, refusing to look up. "I walk where I walk." Silas chuckled, though there was no humor in it. He leaned closer, his breath hot with ale. "Careful, Dren. Some alleys aren't meant for the likes of you. Some things in this town are beyond your pay. Step wrong, and you'll find yourself under the weight of debts no coin can clear. The menace was unmistakable, wrapped in casual words but heavy with threat. Calder met Silas's eyes at last, the heat of the forge flickering between them. He said nothing, but inside, a resolve hardened like iron cooling into steel. If Silas was watching him, then Holt's reach was deeper than he feared. That evening, Calder returned to the alley with his heart pounding. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining. The bull was still there, but something was wrong. The shoes were gone. Brutus shifted restlessly, stamping, snorting, its entire body alive with unease. Calder's chest burned with sudden anger. Someone had come, someone who wanted to erase the trace of Darren Vey. But the bull had not left. That, too, meant something. Calder searched the nearby walls, the drains, the piles of rubbish scattered in the corners. His hands were cold and wet when they finally brushed against something stuffed inside a broken drainpipe. He tugged it free, a scrap of paper, creased and smeared with dirt. By lantern light, he made out jagged writing, numbers, coordinates, times. It looked like part of a schedule, smuggling routes, perhaps. His heart raced. If Holt's men were moving children as cargo, this could be the key. But the thought cut both ways. To follow this meant risking not just himself, but Bryn. If Holt suspected him, Silas's warning would become more than words. His stomach twisted as he folded the paper into his coat. Duty pressed on him again, heavy as the anvil, and yet his decision had already been made. The nights that followed became a blur of shadow and pursuit. Calder traced the routes hinted on the paper, slipping through streets after work, his footsteps muffled in the damp night air. More than once he caught sight of Brutus in the distance, following him like a silent sentinel. The bull could not be leashed, could not be commanded, but it appeared when Calder least expected it, a figure of strength and menace in the dark. Their purposes had aligned, though neither spoke the other's language. Unseen, others watched as well. Holt's network was not blind, and Calder's movements stirred whispers. Men in taverns muttered of the factory apprentice, sniffing too close. Dramatic irony hung over every night, for Calder thought himself the hunter, while in truth he had already become the hunted. The turning point came sudden and sharp. One night, while following a route toward the edge of the district, Calder saw a wagon standing in the rain-dark street. Two men flanked it, one holding a lantern, the other pushing a thin figure forward. Calder's heart leapt into his throat. Darren Vey, gaunt, trembling, his small frame half swallowed by ragged clothes, was being shoved toward the wagon's back, and standing nearby, overseeing, was Silas Roke. Calder's body surged forward before his mind could catch up, but he was not the only one who moved. From the shadows thundered Brutus, horns lowered, a roar bursting from his chest. The wagon horses screamed and bolted as Brutus charged, scattering the men. Silas cursed, leaping back, his face lit by the lantern's glow. Calder rushed into the chaos, seizing Darren by the arm. "Come with me!" he cried, dragging the boy away from the wagon's gaping maw. Darren stumbled, his eyes wide, his breath shallow and frantic. Behind them, Silas shouted orders, but the bull was a storm, driving the men back with each furious strike of hoof and horn. Calder and Darren darted into the side streets, the sounds of battle echoing behind them. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but he did not stop until the shouts were swallowed by distance. At last, in a quiet corner beneath a broken lamppost, Calder crouched beside Darren. The boy's face was pale, his lips trembling. Calder steadied him with both hands. "You're safe now. You're safe." Darren shook his head violently, his voice a cracked whisper. "It wasn't just me. They took others, and they need the bull." Calder froze, the words cutting through him sharper than any blade. His mind raced, but the boy's eyes told him it was truth. Holt's men were not just after children, they were after Brutus as well. As Calder held Darren close, his chest heaving with exhaustion, the unanswered question clawed at his thoughts with merciless force. Why? What purpose could a battle-scarred bull serve in such a cruel trade? That question haunted him, even as the rain began again, washing the blood and dust from the streets, and in his heart, Calder knew the storm had only begun. What shocked Calder most, however, was Darren's whisper. "It wasn't just me. They took others, and they need the bull." Those words set fire in Calder's thoughts. Holt wasn't simply moving children. He wanted Brutus. Why? What purpose could a battle-scarred bull serve in such a cruel trade? That unanswered question haunted Calder as he prepared for the storm that was coming. The days after Darren's rescue were restless ones, thick with unease. Calder barely slept, his mind constantly circling back to Holt and the shadow his empire cast over Harrowfen. Darren stayed in the small room he shared with Bryn, a bundle of nerves who startled at every creak of the house. Calder tried to reassure his younger brother, but Bryn had always been perceptive. He could tell danger pressed close. Every night, Calder would sit by the window, watching the fog curl down the alleyways, half expecting to see Holt's men already there, ready to batter down the door. The thought that they were being hunted was not paranoia, it was truth. Holt's men scoured the town, asking questions, spreading whispers. No one openly challenged them. To do so was to court ruin. Calder quickly realized that keeping Darren hidden wasn't enough. Hiding solved nothing, and Holt's men would never stop looking. The only way forward was to bring the fight back to them. He needed to expose Holt, to tear down his network piece by piece. But Calder was no soldier, no trained fighter, just a machinist at Helrick Forge with debts, responsibilities, and a younger brother who depended on him. Still, he felt something in him shift. The bull had fought with raw instinct to protect the boy. Could he, a man, do less? It was then he reached out to Tovin Krail, an older machinist who had once worked alongside Calder's father. Tovin was a stoic man with grease permanently embedded in his fingernails and a limp that told of old injuries. He had long despised Holt's grip on the city, though he kept his head down to survive. When Calder appeared at his workshop after dark, Tovin studied him with a grim silence, then finally said, "Your father would have done the same. Come in." He owed Calder's family a debt, one he seemed willing to pay. The workshop became their refuge, a hidden place of planning, maps, and whispered strategies over the clatter of tools. For the first time, Calder's objective sharpened. It was no longer simply about Darren. It was about dismantling Holt's entire operation. But obstacles loomed large. Holt's reach was vast. He owned the taverns where deals were struck, the docks where shipments left under cover of night, even the ears of certain city watchmen. To go against him was to walk a blade's edge, every step risking blood. The true twist came late one evening, when Darren finally gathered courage to speak. His voice was soft, uneven, but each word carried weight. "Brutus, he wasn't just guarding me," Darren confessed, eyes darting toward the window as though Holt's men might hear. "He was part of it. The smuggling. They made him fight in the pits. He was a distraction. While he bled, they moved crates and children." The boy's hands trembled as he spoke, the memories clearly fresh wounds. "But one night he turned on them. Broke the cages. He found me. He kept them away." Calder sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling. The bull was not just a protector, he was a survivor. Proof of Holt's cruelty turned back against its maker. Brutus carried in his scarred hide the evidence Holt most feared. Saving the boy was important, but saving the bull, keeping him free, was just as vital. Together, they were the truth made flesh. Tovin shook his head slowly, muttering, "If the beast escaped Holt's pits, he'll never forgive it. He'll want it back. And not for fights, something worse." His eyes darkened. "This is bigger than labor trafficking, boy. Holt's not only a slaver. He sells to men with experiments in their minds. Men with coin enough to bend the world." Calder swallowed hard. He had glimpsed only pieces of Holt's darkness, but Darren's words painted a fuller, more horrifying picture. The stakes had grown larger than he ever imagined. With that knowledge, Calder's resolve hardened into action. He and Tovin began planning an assault on Holt's operation. Using the scrap of coordinates Calder had found earlier, they mapped out possible routes and shipment times, marking ambush points where Holt's men might be vulnerable. Darren, though still shaken, helped with what little he knew from overheard conversations in captivity. And always, Brutus lingered near the workshop, his massive frame outlined in the lantern light through the shutters, as though listening, as though volunteering his strength for the coming fight. Calder began to trust his presence, even if he could never truly control him. The bull was no pet, no beast of burden, but an ally, fierce and unbroken. What Calder didn't know, however, was that their plans were already compromised. Dramatic irony laced every whispered strategy. Silas Roke, the foreman who had once threatened Calder at the forge, was Holt's man through and through. He had already caught scent of Calder's intentions. In fact, some of the coordinates Calder believed he had discovered were false, carefully planted bait designed to lead him into a trap. While Calder thought himself the hunter, in truth, he was being watched, his every step weighed by men who wanted him broken. The night of reckoning came under a curtain of rain. Calder, Darren, and Tovin followed the path of wagons down to the old mill yard, guided by the markings on the smuggler's note. Brutus shadowed them silently, hooves striking puddles with heavy thuds. The place was deserted, shrouded in fog, the skeletal frame of the mill rising like a black monument. Calder's pulse quickened, every sense telling him danger pressed close. Still, he pressed on, whispering to Darren, "Stay behind me. Whatever happens, don't run." They had expected wagons laden with crates, men distracted by their cargo. Instead, shadows emerged from every corner of the yard, armed and waiting. They had walked into a trap. Holt himself stepped forward, his coat drawn tight against the rain, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. His voice carried across the space, cutting through the storm. "You think you're clever, Dren? A forge rat playing hero? You saved the boy, yes, but you brought yourself here, and that was all I needed." Calder's fists clenched. "You're finished, Holt. I'll expose everything. The fights, the children, the shipments." He tried to sound steady, but his throat felt dry. Holt only laughed, a sound like gravel sliding. "You think too small. Do you know what they pay for? Not just children, not just labor. They pay for things no honest man should see. That bull, he's worth more than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes. They want him overseas. War experiments, they call it. Turn a beast into a weapon. The boy was bait, nothing more. And you led him right back to me." The revelation struck Calder like a hammer. He had thought Holt only a trafficker of lives and labor, but this was darker, a trade in cruelty masked as science. Before Holt could say more, the storm broke in action. Brutus charged, his horns tearing through the ring of men, scattering them like dry leaves. Steel clashed against horn, shouts echoing in the rain. Calder grappled with Silas, the fight brutal and close, every strike filled with years of bitterness. They slammed into crates, the smell of rust and damp wood filling Calder's lungs. Tovin, though older and limping, swung a heavy wrench with desperate force, his teeth bared in grim determination. Darren crouched in terror, clutching a piece of scrap metal like a dagger, his eyes wide with fear yet lit with resolve. Chaos reigned, but through it, Calder saw his chance. Amid the crates and ledgers spilling open, one book caught his eye, a ledger thick with ink, marked with names, routes, shipments, buyers. The heart of Holt's empire laid bare. He seized it, pressing it to his chest even as Holt cursed from across the yard. Men fell, the bull roared, and the yard echoed with the fury of both man and beast. In the end, Holt slipped away into the night, his promise of revenge trailing behind him like smoke. But the battle was not meaningless. Around Calder lay broken men, scattered crates, and the ledger that could burn Holt's empire from its foundations. Brutus stood tall in the rain once more, chest heaving, scars glistening beneath the storm's light. Darren stumbled to Calder's side, gripping his arm with trembling hands. His voice cracked, but his words carried a weight that silenced the chaos. "We can't stop now." The aftermath shifted Harrowfen into whispers and tension. Calder moved Darren and Bryn into Tovin's workshop under cover of night, his boots splashing through rain-slick alleys while Brutus kept pace in the shadows. The heavy ledger, wrapped in oilcloth, never left Calder's reach. He kept it hidden in a tool chest beneath broken gears, knowing that its pages carried Holt's downfall, but also the danger that would bring hunters to their door. By morning, word had already spread, not of the ambush, not of the ledger, but of a beast. "A wild bull in the city," townsfolk murmured, their voices caught between awe and dread. Holt's men fueled the rumor, twisting truth into a weapon. They claimed Brutus had gored innocents, that he was a monster prowling the streets. City watchmen pinned notices warning citizens to report sightings. Yet for every whisper of fear, another story grew. A tale passed from worker to worker of a bull who had shielded a child from cruel men and stood in defiance of a tyrant. The city itself seemed divided, half trembling, half quietly inspired. Calder watched the conflict with wary eyes. From the workshop window he saw dockhands mutter and glance over their shoulders, women hurry children indoors, and groups of men share low conversations in tavern corners. Fear and hope clashed in the streets, and Calder knew the outcome would shape their survival. Brutus was no longer just a beast. He was becoming a symbol, whether as monster or guardian depended on who controlled the truth. At night, Calder sat with Tovin at the workbench, the ledger open between them. Candlelight traced lines of names, shipments, and coded entries. Darren hovered close, often pointing to certain scrawled notes he remembered hearing whispered by Holt's men. "That one," the boy would say, jabbing a finger at a page. "He was there." I heard his voice outside the cages. Calder listened carefully, cross-checking the boy's memory with the inked evidence. Piece by piece, they built a case strong enough to pierce Holt's armor of influence. "We cannot go to the watch," Tovin warned one evening, his voice heavy. He leaned on the bench, the lines on his face carved deep by fatigue. "Half of them are his men, the rest his debtors. If you hand this book to the wrong hands, it will vanish before morning." Calder nodded grimly. "Then we find another way." He tapped the ledger with his calloused fingers. "If the city sees this, if they read it themselves, Holt cannot silence them all." Meanwhile, Brutus came and went as though the alleys were his true pasture. Each dawn, he returned scarred, sometimes limping, but never broken. Calder wondered if Holt's hunters clashed with him at night, yet the bull always came back, standing near the workshop as if guarding its door. Children began to leave scraps of bread or apples at corners, whispering quiet prayers to the beast they thought might hear. Men toasted him with mugs of bitter ale, while watchmen sharpened spears and set traps in shadowed lanes. Brutus was hunted and revered in equal measure, his legend growing faster than Calder could control. The chance Calder sought came from a forgotten relic. While combing through the ledger's notes, he discovered mention of an abandoned printing press, once used for counterfeit permits by Holt's men, now left to rust in a derelict warehouse. When Calder showed the entry to Toven, the old machinist's lips curved into the faintest smile. "A press, eh? If it still runs, that may be our hammer together." Under the veil of night, they cleared dust and cobwebs from the machine. Toven, with his practiced hands, coaxed gears back into motion, oiling rusted cogs until the old press groaned to life. For days they labored in secrecy, copying pages from the ledger, each sheet bearing Holt's crimes in stark, unflinching ink. The smell of oil and ink filled the workshop, staining their hands black. Soon, workers found the papers slipped under tavern doors, folded into tool crates, nailed to posts outside factories. The word spread like wildfire. Names of children taken, shipments hidden, lives sold. Murmurs rose into anger. Anger turned into resistance. Holt's empire, built upon silence and shadows, began to crack beneath the weight of truth made visible. Dramatic irony cut sharp through these victories. For while the people rallied, Calder knew it was not justice that moved officials to act. Men who once spat at him now sent quiet messengers, urging him to come forward with protection. Not because they believed in law, but because the people demanded answers. Calder saw it for what it was, fear of losing control. Still, he played along, feeding only what strengthened the workers' resolve while keeping the ledger itself hidden. But Holt did not retreat quietly. He struck back with fire. One midnight, as rain lashed against the rooftops, Tovan's workshop erupted in flames. Calder awoke choking on smoke, Bryn clinging to his arm, Darren pounding at the door. The inferno spread fast, sparks leaping from timber to timber, tools bursting in the heat. For a heartbeat, Calder thought it was the end. Then Brutus came. The bull rammed through the collapsing wall, his hide seared by flame, his horns scattering burning beams. He pushed through smoke and fire, shoving Calder and the boys toward the street. The roar of the blaze mixed with his bellows, a terrifying, magnificent sound. Tovan stumbled behind, coughing hard but alive, dragged by Calder's grip. Through the rain-slick chaos, Holt emerged from the shadows, his blade gleaming, his face twisted in cruel satisfaction as he closed in. "You think ink will change this city?" he mocked, stepping closer. "The people will never trust a factory hand. My word weighs more than yours ever will." Calder stood firm, though the heat licked his back and his lungs burned with smoke. He tightened his hold on a length of iron pipe, meeting Holt's sneer with defiance. "Not anymore," he said, his voice raw. "They've seen what you are. You can't silence them all." Holt lunged. The blade flashed in the firelight, coming down in a deadly arc. But before it struck, Brutus charged. With a thunderous impact, the bull's horns drove into Holt's chest, lifting him from his feet. Holt's cry was drowned by the roar of flame and the bull's fury. The crime lord's reign ended not with law or judgment, but with the raw power of the beast he had once tried to break. When silence fell, only the crackle of dying fire and the patter of rain remained. Calder stood in the ruins, chest heaving, soot streaking his face. Darren clutched his shoes once more, pressing against Calder's side. Bryn held tight to his brother's arm, wide-eyed but unhurt. Nearby, Brutus loomed, his breath heavy, his gaze steady as though he understood the weight of what had been done. Harrowfen would never be the same. Holt's network collapsed in days, crushed beneath evidence and fury. Officials scrambled to claim control, but the people knew the truth. They remembered who had stood against darkness, who had fought for the voiceless. Calder felt a quiet shift within himself, realizing he had stepped beyond wages and survival. He had entered a larger fight, one he had never asked for but could not abandon. And at the heart of it stood Brutus, not as a beast. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of loyalty, compassion, and the profound unspoken connections between a human and an animal. This narrative aims to highlight the importance of dignity and to inspire a deeper appreciation for the extraordinary bonds that defy simple explanation.